If you're someone who is looking to be opening a business, or even if you have an existing business but you're testing new ideas, the decisions that you make right at the very beginning are going to be some of the most valuable decisions and some of the most important decisions that you make. And very often, a lot of that isn't handled properly, which can lead into some very, very major issues. Things like bad leases, things like spaces that don't work for business models. There's all sorts of pitfalls that you can fall into, which is why I specifically work with business owners from the very, very beginning, like the earliest inception of their idea, all the way through opening the doors and helping them work through that process, building out the local teams that are required, all the different steps that are needed to not only have a really impactful design, but also have a successfully executed project. And so we're going to talk about that right now, what that looks like and why I look at it that way. And so if we just jump over here and we look at this line as a project timeline, you at some point have your initial idea. And that can be pretty broad. It can be, just something very rough. And as you develop your idea, you need to be building out your business model to see if it even has a validity to it and it can actually work for you. And you start thinking about finding spaces. And if you like a space, you'll probably sign an LOI, letter of intent. And after you negotiate a lease, you'll sign a lease. And once you sign your lease, that's really when your next goal will be to be putting in for a permit. And once you get your permit, you'll be building the project. And that'll get you to be open. And the biggest thing about it is that the money that you're spending sort of all the way up to the lease, you might have legal fees, you might have other expenses. If you're an existing company, you may have even development people who are working on this. But it's all relatively short money because most of the time, once you have a lease signed, that's when you start having to commit real money. So you'll have to hire an architect. And they'll have to have engineers, consultants, probably more engineers. If you have a specialty contractor, they'll have their own engineers. And eventually, you'll want to be hiring a general contractor, of course. And I always recommend that the earlier you can get them involved, the better, because not only do they need to be involved to pull the permit, but the pre-construction can be critical to help speed up the process. And so the general contractor, once you have the permit, they'll take over. And certainly the architect is involved, sort of overseeing the construction. And so you're the owner, and you're going to have contracts with all three of these people separately. And potentially, you're going to be needing to have them coordinating with each other. And so this is where the sort of strategy starts to come in as you start putting the teams together, because they have to work together well. And they have to start, coordinating pretty early in the process. Because once you actually get the lease signed, that's when you probably have a down payment. And all of a sudden, all of these people that you've hired, they start to add up. And so all of a sudden you need to be putting in, call it 10%, just for round numbers, of your project. And maybe you sort of wait while you're waiting for your permit, but then once construction comes along as well, that's when, it's very, very, very high in terms of your spend. And so when we look at it that way, this early phase, really up until where you have your lease signed, that's when so many of the decisions that you're being forced to make will have a huge knock-on effect as you go through the rest of the project. Because once you're at this point, the whole goal is to get to here. This is the phase where you basically figure everything out. Because once you have a lease signed, once your money starts getting put into the lease, once you start paying this whole team, your goal is to get here as fast as you possibly can. And the way that you do that is you front load as much of it as you can. And it's not about hiring everybody early, but it is about being strategic, because this is where a lot of the high value decisions are being made. And so the more that you can do that, the more effectiveness and efficiency you're going to see once you actually have a lease signed, because you're hitting the ground running knowing that things are happening. Along that way, it's critical that you don't get into a bad lease. That's going to hamstring your whole business. You know, having a business model that actually works with the space, making sure the LOI is actually in your favor, making sure your goals and the business model and the space and the LOI and the lease all are talking to each other and working. And so this point is really where the money starts burning a lot faster. And so that's why the more that you can front load these sort of high value decisions, let's try that again. The more that you can front load these high value decisions, that's why you can accelerate projects and really move forward this way confidently. Because you've figured out a lot of different things and you've put the right team together. And you know that they're all talking to each other in the way that they need to. There's no surprises, basically. And the whole idea here is that you are planning before the game. Planning before the battle, winning the battle before it even happens. And so whatever analogy you want to use there, the whole idea is that you're actually planning this way ahead of time and you're setting yourself up for success, because if you make a mistake in this early stage, which a lot of people end up trying to save a couple bucks, that's really where you can end up putting yourself behind the eight ball. And that is specifically why when I say I work with clients from the earliest inception of their ideas, it's because so much of this actually has nothing to do with even the design. The design is an important part of it, but having a successful project is way more than that. And the reason that I work this way is because typically architects are so isolated in terms of the part that they actually work in, which is basically getting you from up to a permit drawing, more or less. And then of course there's a little bit of involvement during construction, but really it's this middle phase that they are creating technical documents, they're coordinating engineering, they're doing a lot of critically important work, but you're more or less telling them what you're looking for them to do. And you're telling them how you want your business to run. You're telling them a lot of the things that they're then basically folding into whatever the design is. But before that, the more you can visualize, the more you can understand your business model, the more you can coordinate your business model with the actual space and with your layout. And all of this can be done fairly effectively at a relatively low investment. That makes it so that when you get to this point, before you sign your lease, before you start spending all this money, you can make sure that you're more confident in the way that you want to move forward, and that you actually have a business model that you believe confidently is going to be supported by the space you're about to commit to. And certainly there's a lot of different bumps along the way, but the more that you can front load that work, the more it really helps you be set up for success. And that's the reason why so much of my work is working with clients on that very, very early stage development to get their ideas into something that can then be converted into a physical space that they can use to operate their business. And so I hope that's helpful. And if you would like to talk about your project, please reach out to me. Have a nice day.